In the 1950s, Charles Schulz created a recurring gag for a pair of his Peanuts comic strip characters, Charlie Brown and Lucy. Every year, Charlie Brown would try to kick a football while Lucy would hold it. And every year, Lucy would find a new reason to yank that ball out from under him yet again. Charlie Brown often wonders why he keeps on falling for this trick. And in this cartoon from 1970, he might get an answer as to just how long he'll have to keep doing this. We start off with an incredulous Charlie Brown realizing what time of year it is again. Off panel, we can assume that Lucy is getting ready for the annual ritual. "She must be kidding," Charlie Brown says. "Charlie Brown," begins Lucy, but Charlie cuts her off before she can begin, saying, "I can't believe it." He must know what she has in mind. "Charlie Brown," Lucy says, about to lay out the plan yet again. "I'll hold the football and you come running up and kick it." But Charlie Brown is already feeling desperate. He turns his head to the sky and yells at the top of his lungs, "How long, O Lord?" Lucy, hearing this question, is reminded of something. "You're quoting from the 6th chapter of Isaiah, aren't you, Charlie Brown? Until the cities lie waste without inhabitant, and horses without men, and the land is utterly desolate." Actually, she continues, there is a note of protest in the question as asked by Isaiah, for we might say he was unwilling to accept the finality of the Lord's judgment. Now, as she is continuing down this theological mental thread that she's on, Charlie Brown thinks he can get a quick one in on her, and he runs up and kicks that ball as she is talking about Isaiah. But in the next frame, we get the annual image of Lucy pulling that ball away and of Charlie Brown flying through the air and landing on the ground with a whump. And finally, Lucy answers Charlie's initial question, "How long?" "All your life, Charlie Brown, all your life." I'm not quite sure how to measure all of Charlie Brown's life because he is, after all, a cartoon character that doesn't age. But we can say that this recurring gag was a large part of the rest of Charles Schulz's life. He made a new entry into this series every year right up until October 24th, 1999. Had he not died the following February, I would be hard-pressed to imagine a new cartoon not showing up that next fall. Now, I think this cartoon works two different ways towards helping us with our message this week. First, there's this element of Charlie Brown trying again, year after year. He moves on from his past failures, even if they're still on his mind. And second, I think there's an element of forgiveness at play here too. Lucy pulls that same prank on him every year, but Charlie Brown is willing to give her another chance every year. I don't think he would be quite so willing to keep playing this game unless there was some part of him that forgives Lucy again and again. There's also a lesson here, like I told the kids, about learning from the past, but that's a message for another day. There is an obvious reason why football is on my mind this week. I think football is on the minds of many Americans today. And while football itself may not be inherently religious, I am a firm believer that we can find reminders of our spiritual life, even in something normal like a football game. So consider this. There is a mechanic in football called down and distance. I promise you are familiar with down and distance, even if you don't know it by that name. The concept of down and distance allows a team to not have to travel the entire length of a football field in order to score. That would be too tall a feat if a team only had just a couple plays to march down from one end of the field to the other, and I think that we would see much, much lower scores if that was the case. Instead, each team has 4 plays, 4 chances to advance 10 yards. Each separate play is called a down, and each down is announced with the distance needed to get a new set of downs. Hence the name, down and distance. You see this on every play on your TV screen. It's plastered all over the stadium if you're there live. 1st and 10, the first chance with 10 yards to go. After that, it might be 2nd and 4, the second chance with 4 yards to go. And if that team gets that number of yards, they have a whole new set of downs, a clean slate to start over, a new set of chances to get further. On the field, this is marked by 2 orange posts connected by a chain that is 10 yards long. On another post, you'll see a number that changes from 1 to 4 to let everyone know what down the next play is. As a team gains yards, the referees will move the rearmost post closer to the further post. This marks how much farther the team needs to go to get that first down. Once a team reaches that further post, the referees, they move those chains 10 more yards down the field, and a brand new set of downs begins. And that's why you'll often hear a first down described as moving the chains. A simple mechanic of second chances, one that allows progress to be made. Now, before we go much further, no, today is not Football 101. Today is not about getting you excited for the Super Bowl. It's not even about you helping you better understand the game of football. Those things might happen as side effects, but that's not the real focus for us today. Forgiveness, wiping the slate clean, moving the chains. How it affects our interactions with God, how it affects our interactions with others. And yes, how we can be reminded of this through something as simple and as common as a football game. You see, we can't make it down the field on our own either. We get lost, we get afraid, we get broken and weary and beaten down, and we mess up and we make mistakes. We can't go from one end of life to the other by ourselves. We need something that can renew us and restore us, something that can set us straight when we fall short. We need something or someone that can wipe the slate clean for us. We need to be able to get our own first down when we need it. The good news is that is much easier for us to do than it is for a football team. Those guys have to go 10 yards. All we have to do is go to God, and that's no distance at all. And the best part about all of this is that it doesn't even come with a hidden string. God's not going to try to cash in on all this forgiveness later. There's no catch to his offering a second chance every time we ask for it. Well, maybe there's one tiny catch. Let's read together from Matthew 18, 21 through 22. It's a short gospel reading today, but its meaning is huge. And I also made a last-minute change and went with the New King James Version, so it might not totally match up, but we'll follow along. Then Peter came to him and said, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times?" And Jesus said to him, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. 70 times 7 is a big number. I'm an English major, so math isn't my strong suit, but my calculator told me that that's 490 times. Now, Jesus' answer here, it seems to give us a firm number on how often we should forgive others. His point, though, isn't really that we have a set number of times to forgive. He's saying that forgiveness isn't really something we can check off a few times for people and then be done with them. It goes on and on and on because that's what God has done for us. I found a pretty good illustration of this concept in this verse, written by a pastor named Johnny Dean, and I would like to paraphrase that for you now. Suppose Peter comes to Jesus and asks that question, how many times do we forgive people? Is 7 good enough? And let's pretend that Jesus responds this way. Peter, here's what I want you to do. Go to Walmart and buy a spiral notebook, like the ones that the kids use at school to take notes. You'll want a bright color because you'll always need to see it. You'll always need to know where it is, never lose track of it. You're also going to need pencils, lots of pencils. Now, in that notebook, you want to write the names of every person you know. But in between each person, leave lots of space. And save room at the end in case you meet any new people. Every time someone wrongs you, put a check by their name. And when someone gets to 490, you don't have to forgive them for anything again. Now picture Peter saying, "But Lord, if I do that, I'll only ever spend all my time in that notebook, adding up check marks, finding people's names, and at the rate that we're meeting new people, I'm going to need book after book after book." And to that, I think Jesus might say, now you're getting the point. God's forgiveness of us has far exceeded our own expectations of how often we should be forgiven. So too should our forgiveness of others far exceed how often we might like to forgive them. You know, the interesting thing about this passage, and it's not really something that I had planned on for our context today, is that it also reminds me a bit of football. This kind of dawned on me as I was preparing the sermon this week. 7 is also a pretty important number in the game of football. Because a touchdown is worth 6 points, and the almost obligatory extra point adds another to that total, the score of a game quite often uses the number 7 and multiples of that number. In Matthew 18, we have Peter asking if 7 is the magic number for us to forgive others, and Jesus using some form of the multiplication tables to provide an answer. But unlike in football, where those 7 stacking up on each other is vitally important because that's how we dictate the score of the game, for God, it couldn't matter less. In football, we keep score to find a winner, but you know, God doesn't keep score at all. So as you're watching this game tonight and you see those 7s tick across that scoreboard, you can perhaps think about Matthew 18:22. And actually, maybe once you think about it this way, you might even think about forgiveness and God's grace every time you watch a football game. Every time you see that number 7 roll across the screen. Oh, and by the way, this might be the point of today's sermon, to do some holy subliminal messaging on the game of football, so that as you watch it, you maybe think about some biblical concepts along the way. And so maybe now you can even say that you're contemplating your faith as you're watching the game. You're welcome. To recap for today, our post-game report, so to speak. Charlie Brown gave Lucy every chance. How long Charlie Brown has to keep doing this little dance of his is also how long we have to keep forgiving the rest of our lives. We aren't a football team, though. We don't have to get 10 yards. All we have to do is just ask. And people listening to Jesus answering Peter that day, maybe even Peter himself, were surely astounded that they had such a huge responsibility to forgive others. We don't keep score on them, and we do that because God doesn't keep score on us. Our victory doesn't come from having a higher score like in football. It doesn't even come from having a lower score like in golf, if we maybe make less mistakes than our neighbor. Our victory comes from having our slate wiped clean. We have unlimited first downs. There is no moving the chains with God. God doesn't need a 1st and 10 marker. He doesn't need those orange poles tied together with chains. God has broken the chains for us. And in turn, we get to show that same forgiveness to the world. And all of God's people said,